One of the stakeholders in early care and education may be someone that offers grants. Grants are something wonderful that you can receive in order to help you complete different projects or do different things that you need to do within your program. But you first have to make sure that what you need to do matches up with what the grant offerer is offering. And so the best grant matches will score 4 or 5 in every category. There's 6 categories or more that the grant provider will be looking at. So if you have a score of 3 or higher is not given for each, it is doubtful that it is a good match. So starting out, you have to make sure that your goal matches that of the grant provider. And we have to start out looking at the different categories. I mentioned previously that there are different categories, and the categories that we'll be looking at on here, or the criteria, is the matches the goals of the grant provider, matches the required demographics, able to be completed in a specific time frame, sustainable after allowable grant period, necessary funds are available, evaluation methods are compatible. And that's what we will be looking at throughout the rest of this presentation. So as previously mentioned, you have to look at the goals of your project and compare them to the criteria given by the grant providers in the RFP, or the request for proposal. You have to look at the grant descriptions in order to find out what is required and try to meet the criteria as closely as possible. Without a close match between the funder's goals and what you are proposing, you will never get funded. Then the next criteria to meet is check whether the grant provider has focused in on a specific type of community or families or children demographically, or established priorities for meeting certain demographic requirements. For example, a request for proposal from the federal government might state, the Secretary gives absolute priority to media literacy projects implemented in schools where the number of children from low-income families equals or exceeds 75%. If your program doesn't meet the definition of a school, or if your school does not meet this criterion, you should look elsewhere for grants. The next criteria to be concerned about is able to be completed in time frame. Every grant runs only for a specified time. While your project might be ongoing and not necessarily completed within this time frame, the goals you set must be attainable within the time allotted by the grant provider. Your measurable goals must be attained in a specified time to meet the criteria of the grant. The next criterion is it sustainable after allowable grant period. This criterion is not necessarily related to any particular grant. Most grant providers are concerned with what will happen to your program after the grant's time period runs out. Will your project fall apart with no additional funding, or is it self-sufficient? You have to make sure that any project you begin can either be fully completed within the time frame allowed or is sustainable after the allotted time without additional grants. The next criteria is to make sure that to know that there are necessary funds are available. So after determining your monetary needs, you will know how much grant money you have to find. Make sure, however, to read through the funding criteria for grants you are seeking. Some of them require matching funds. If you cannot find these other sources of money, you will probably have to look elsewhere for grants. One positive, however, is that many organizations allow in-kind matching funds. For example, if you have a professional volunteer their time to help you with your project, you can receive a credit for how much their services would actually cost in the real world. From the beginning of the project design, the grant writer must think of possible evaluation methods. All results must be measurable. Some grants allow you to provide your own methods for evaluation. Others have detailed evaluation instructions. If your project does not fit with the criteria required for evaluation, this would not be a good option for you. Grant providers may also use a similar checklist to evaluate your funding proposal to see how well it matches their requirements. As I mentioned before, proposals that rate a 4 or 5 will be considered for funding. Proposals that rate 3 or less will probably not receive funding. However, you can ask what your proposal scored low on and revise your proposal and resubmit the next time the funds become available from this grant provider. Yeah, then dinner will be ready in a couple minutes. Perfect timing. Okay, bye-bye.